future.
There are no people.
There are no people in the future.
No people at all.
There are no people in the future.
Where did all my people go?
There are no people in the future.
Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody, welcome. It is Monday, November 14th, 2022, and has it been one hell of a week? Welcome to Raging Chicken's Out to Coop Live. This is Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. And Out to Coop Live, of course, we talk to progressives, activists, and troublemakers of all sorts, right from our own backyards and from across the country. You can also join us at the end of the week for our Friday Politics Roundup, where we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. And you can check out our once or twice monthly The Wednesday Show with Cyril Michaleko. Cyril, of course, is the editor-in-chief of the Bucks County Beacon, and he joins me to drill down into Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and international politics. You can get all our shows by subscribing to our podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We're there. Just go. And rate us while you're there. Hit those 5-star reviews. Tell your friends. That's how we make sure the show gets out and other people can find the show. And you can support this show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress to become a patron today. And you can help out the show by checking out our YouTube channel if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for this show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time that we go live. For more PA progressive talk, you can tune in to the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern, wherever you get your streams. And for information about all his shows, all the broadcasts, head on over to thericksmithshow.com for the latest across all the platforms. And if you haven't already, you got to check out the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast. The amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind this podcast rock the house. And they know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at The Night Caucus. That's at The Night Caucus on Twitter. And subscribe to their podcasts on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts. For all you gamers out there, The Game In, that's with 2 N's, The Game In is a Quakertown-based black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show. They've got everything from retro N64s, the latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, walls of Funko Pops. And look, with kids back in school, they do well on their report card, they get a discount. Come on, you can't beat it. Check them out on their Facebook page. Follow them on Twitter at TheGameIn. If you got a question about a game, look for something hard to get, shoot them a message or drop them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. And a special shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at SongADayman, 2 N's, at SongADayman on Twitter. And for those folks who have sick and tired of the school board wars, don't let Paul Martino and his oligarch friends buy our schools and push extremist politics in our community. Raging Chicken has teamed up with Levelfield to launch a truly community-rooted PAC to invest in organizing, supporting local and statewide progressive candidates, and unmasking the toxic organizations injecting our communities with right-wing extremism. We're putting small dollar donations to work to beat back the power of big money. You can get more information and drop your donation at ragingchicken.levelfield.net. Well, today we've got one heck of a show for you this week. Yes, tonight I welcome Sean Crampsie to the show. Sean is the Director of Government Relations for APSCUF, the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties. That's my union, baby. APSCUF represents the faculty and coaches of the Pennsylvania state system of higher education. And we'll be taking a look at the results of last week's midterm elections and unpack what it means for PA and public higher education in the Commonwealth. Sean has been the Director of Government Relations for APSCUF since 2017, where he advocates for the faculty, coaches, and students of Pennsylvania state-owned universities. Sean lobbies for state funding for public higher education, tuition affordability, and protection of workers' rights. Prior to joining APSCUF, Sean spent 4 years with the PA School Boards Association working on K-12 education issues. All right, guys, no joke, folks. And Sean is also serving his second term as councilman for the borough of Carlisle, because he has got nothing else to do with his free time, apparently. During his time on council, Sean has advocated for his community and helped pass an anti-discrimination ordinance, approve affordable housing, and help pass a rental inspection ordinance. Sean received his bachelor's degree in political science from Bloomsburg University and lives in Carlisle, PA, with his wife Brittany and his little kid Carter. You can follow Sean on Twitter at Sean Crampsie. That's SeanCrampsie, just like it says in the show up there. And you can also follow APSCUF Government Relations at APSCUF-GR. That's APSCUF-GR on Twitter. And, you know, while you're at it, hit up our union at APSCUF. That's at APSCUF on Twitter. Sean, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kevin, thanks so much for having me. I'm glad I can finally get on.
Oh man, I'm thrilled. And like, you know, I guess I couldn't ask for a better week, I guess, to have you on. Because it's like, what the you know, it's been one heck of a week, I have to say.
Yes, this week has been a month, it feels like.
100%. Well, listen, before we get into some of the stuff on the elections here, you know, can you tell a little about folks about what you do for APSCUF, kind of what your kind of job entails and what you pay attention to when looking at kind of state politics and what's happening in the PA state legislature?
Yeah, so I'm lucky and fortunate enough to be the Director of Government Relations at APSCUF. That's the fancy title for lobbyist. And what I do in my role as lobbyist is I get to represent you and our other amazing faculty members and coaches. I tell people, you know, it's kind of cool. My life has come full circle. I get to represent the people that taught me. With Bloomsburg being one of our 14 universities. So, you know, day to day, I get to be up at the Pennsylvania Capitol on faculty and coaches' behalf, working on issues to make our state system and our schools stronger. So whether it be funding, whether it be workers' rights, and then those issues, you know, whatever we work on at APSCUF has a direct benefit for our students, right? So when we talk about free and affordable college and scholarships and protecting our faculty members, those all have direct impacts on the amazing students that go to our universities. So that's on the lobbying side and the policy side, and we can get, I think, more into that at the end when we talk about what the future looks like. And then on the political side, we have a political action committee at APSCUF. We endorse candidates, and we try to fight to make sure that we get pro-union, pro-public higher education folks elected to the legislature. Thankfully, last week we had a pretty good run of the folks that we support being elected. So we're excited to see many of them get sworn in January.
Fantastic. Well, so I think it's fair to say at this point that what happened on Tuesday was a bit of a surprise to virtually everybody. I mean, was that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And anyone who says they weren't surprised, you know, maybe some in the House Democratic Caucus weren't surprised, but outside of that, I think anyone that says they weren't surprised might be lying to you.
Yeah, I think, or just wanted to kind of make sure they get some extra follows on Twitter or something like that.
Right.
So let's just take folks back a few days, right? Kind of use our little Wayback Machine here and kind of talk about, say, the lead up to the midterms. Because I want to kind of put in context, the kind of how momentous Tuesday was in some ways. So can you give us a sense of like going into the midterms, right? You're sitting there in Harrisburg, you're kind of plugged into this, you're endorsing candidates, you know, doing the lobbying thing. Have a sense of, you know, what's happening, you know, what's happening at the election, what likely outcomes might be. What were their expectations going into the election? How were you seeing it at that point?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think it's important for folks to realize, because we've kind of gotten a little far away from it, but this year's election in the House and the Senate and for Congress, they were all new districts, right? So we're hitting this 10-year period of new districts after the census. There was the Legislative Reapportionment Commission that put out these maps, right? And those maps were upheld by the PA Supreme Court, so they became, you know, the maps that folks are running on. So I think leading into that, if you look at, we'll look at each chamber, right? So if you look at the House, I think everyone was in agreement there would be Democratic pickups, just because of where these new districts were drawn, population shifts. It seemed pretty obvious that there would, based on performance and then based on some races that didn't even have opponents, the Dems would pick up a few seats. On the Republican side, in the House, I think they were looking at some high-performing Trump districts where they could potentially do some flips as well, to blunt some of those new districts potentially going to Democrats. On the Senate side, it was kind of a longer game because those seats are staggered. So 25 were up this year, 25 will be up in 2024. So if you're a Senate Democrat, I think they saw the opportunity to protect the seats that they had, and then for a pickup or 2 or 3 this year, and then looking to 2024, a pickup of from their side potentially 2 to 3, and then on the Republican side, right? They had I think 2 or 3 targets this year, and the same will come up in 2024. So the playing field was new. Leading up to the election, I had my numbers. I thought the House Dems would get to around 97 or 98. I thought the Senate Dems would get to around 22 and have the Senate Republicans at 28. So on the Senate side, that happened. That's what we saw on the House side. I think we saw a different story that, as you mentioned, most folks did not expect to see. I think the issues, obviously, leading up to the election made a major impact. I was looking back, if you think to 2014, when we had the governor's race and Governor Wolf knocked out Governor Tom Corbett, I think all polling and anyone you talk to, education was kind of the top issue. It was interesting for us being a union and then also working in higher ed. That issue, in all the polling, it just wasn't cracking the top 5. It was the economy, it was abortion, it was crime. So that's kind of the issues that led to what we saw. The other thing where I think, you may have seen a surprise in the House in running some numbers leading up to the election, that the Dems had to flip 12 seats. There were 12, I think, on their map that were in play where the performance was, and performance, not registration, was at or above 50%. Of those 12 seats, they won 8, they lost 2, and then there's 2 that are still too close to call. But where we saw, I think, the moves get made for them to get to the number they're sitting at today, there were 7 seats that I'll call new-ish, right? So we saw with the redistricting, these areas get new seats. The House Democrats won 7-0 in those seats, and then, and then they had a hold in the Northeast, a vacant seat that was held by a Democrat. That their party was actually able to hold onto. So that kind of gets them to that number they're at today.
So, and just so everybody knows, so basically we need 102, right, is the number to get majority in the House.
Correct. So
right.
there's 203 members. So 102 is the majority number.
Right. Excellent. So, great. That's a great setup for kind of where we were going in. And I think that, and your number you said was like 90, 98, 99 is kind of like, that's where it could be, like on a decent day, right? On a bad day, it's going to be lower than that, but where things seem looked at that point. So then election day comes, and I'm sure that as the, as time goes on, and we're gonna be able to do more analysis of actually who turned out, where they turned out, was this new registration? Was it primary kind of abortion that pushed things? Was it, how did that all stuff break down? And my guess is that I did a little back and forth with some folks on Twitter on this not too long ago about like, I don't think Pennsylvania is going to be like a one-story kind of story about what happened during the elections. I think when you look at Bucks County, Montgomery County, kind of like in the ring districts around Philadelphia, you look at some of those kind of new districts that you're pointing out, I think we're going to see different issues, kind of pushing and pulling in different directions. I don't know if you think that's an accurate assessment, or I'm curious how you look at it.
Yeah. It was interesting to see kind of the top tier issues and their breakdown, and then what I think some folks tried to push. So I guess I'll start with that. We had a gubernatorial candidate, Doug Mastriano, who I think both sides of the aisle will agree ran one of the more curious campaigns ever, potentially, for governor of Pennsylvania. But you look at some of the issues he really leaned into, book bans. He was talking about, stripper poles in middle schools. And it's pretty clear based on the results. None of that landed because it wasn't based in what people were feeling back home, right? When he was going out there with some of that more outlandish stuff, I think people were looking around saying, well, wait a second, like that's Democrat, Republican, Independent, I think could look and say, I know the teachers at my local school, I know the community, like that's not happening, right? Like that's just not based in reality. And I think from his campaign, he was trying to pull from some of the national things, what he saw in Virginia, what he saw in Florida, and it just didn't play here in Pennsylvania. So there was some exit polling done, and I think this is super interesting. So the top issue based on this exit poll, I think CNN and there were a few others that did it. 36% of folks across Pennsylvania said abortion was their top issue, which makes sense, right? After the Dobbs decision, I think organizers, I think everyone got motivated behind that issue, and those folks did an amazing job, right? Putting that issue at the forefront and really drawing the differences. Within that 36%, 78% of those broke to the Democrats, 21% broke to the Republicans. So that really was kind of, I think, the issue that tipped the scale on a lot of these races. Interesting. The second issue that was number two at 29% was inflation. So there was kind of that national narrative of, is inflation going to tank President Biden and his party? That issue broke 72% Republican, 26% Democrat. So inflation was not as high of a priority, and then those numbers broke even just a little less, I think made the difference, right? And then the third issue, which really stuck out to me and I think bucked the trend of what we were hearing, crime was at 11%. When you break that down, of those 11%, 51% voted for Fetterman, 55% voted for Shapiro. So there was kind of that, you saw all the attack ads, right? Of Shapiro and Fetterman are soft on crime. It turned out based on this poll, and the electorate actually trusted them more to deal with the issues than Dr. Oz and Doug Mastriano.
That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. So one of the other things too that you notice, so I mean, you've already talked a little about Mastriano and Shapiro, right? Shapiro won, what was it was it 14 point? Or was it 10? I mean, am I getting it to about 14?
13 or 14. I think last I checked, yeah, it was right around 14.
So we'll say right around that 14 percentage points here. Now that was not the margin that Fetterman won by, though, which suggests that you probably had some, my guess, you tell me, that some Republicans were to say, okay, this Mastriano guy, they didn't just say not vote, but they actually may have crossed over and actually supported Shapiro. And there were some efforts in order to get Republicans, say, Republicans for Shapiro and so on. There was, especially kind of in my area, kind of in the Philadelphia, kind of like exurbs or whatever, there was a lot of that kind of push to see some Republicans cross over. So, I mean, can we attribute that difference between, say, the Shapiro win and then Fetterman was what, like 4 points?
Correct. Yep.
How do you see that breakdown of those differences?
Yep. So it's a mix. I will say on the front end, Josh Shapiro, I think when history looks back, will be one of the strongest candidates Pennsylvania has ever seen. So he is on a run. In 2016, he actually broke the record for most votes ever in Pennsylvania. In 2016, he got more votes than Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. So in a year where Donald Trump took PA, Josh Shapiro for Attorney General had over 3 million votes. He follows that up in 2020 with actually outperforming President Biden. So President Biden wins the state. So again, you have 2 years where presidential candidates get fewer votes than an attorney general candidate. So I think that goes to show, the type of campaigner and the type of appeal Josh Shapiro has. He follows that up, again, being top vote getter in this state again this year when you have a hotly contested U.S. Senate race. So I think, that's credit to his campaign where he, I think, expanded the electorate. It wasn't just Democrats coming out, and it wasn't just folks coming out to vote against Mastriano. I think that didn't hurt, but I think you had independents and Republicans looking at his style, looking at his platform, and he's a great campaigner, right? He toured the state. He didn't skip over areas. He was for our universities. He was at Clarion. He was at East Stroudsburg. He was at Bloomsburg. I mean, those places matter, and I think sometimes they feel ignored. So I think that was kind of the credit to his success. Now, on the flip side, I will say John Fetterman did the same thing. He didn't ignore any part of Pennsylvania, and I think when you look at and I saw, I don't want to take credit for this take because I think the Fetterman campaign actually put this out there. It was something like over $500 million in negative ads against Fetterman. Josh Shapiro didn't have that, right? So when Fetterman wins by
point.
4 points, that's a huge achievement. I mean, I think anyone you talk to in some of the polling, they thought it was a toss up 1 point one way or the other. That's a pretty resounding victory for him. So I think you also could have had, some Trump supporters going for Fetterman. Now, I don't think that canceled out that margin. I think Shapiro got that higher margin because of the type of campaign money he had, because of the opponent he had. So I wouldn't read into that split as, oh, this candidate's better, right? They both had kind of their own unique campaign, and credit to both of them. It worked for what they did. And I think, I'm hopeful that folks on social media are giving their flowers to the campaign staffs, because they did a heck of a job on both teams. They really deserve a lot of credit, as well as the candidates.
100%. And I think, again, we're never going to know the answer to this question, but, if Fetterman hadn't had a stroke, I think how that might have affected, his numbers there too as well. Because I got the sense that, I could see like reasonable people having a concern, right? Whether or not it's a justified concern, whether or not it's ableist, all that kind of stuff. But nonetheless, I could see people having that kind of concern. And the fact is that he pushed through it. And I think that, the messaging coming out of it too as well is like, look, and it was like consistent with his campaign. You get knocked down, you get back up again, right? You got the whole Chumbawamba thing going on for him.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think he did a good job relaying it to Pennsylvanians. Pretty much, talk to anyone. They know someone, the teacher, 100%. A family member, a relative. In the weeks leading up to our election, I got to go out to some campuses and talk to our retirees. And I never asked them their political party, but I had come up to me and say, I had a stroke recently, right? And I think it really backfired in the Oz campaign. Some of his staff and some folks trying to take shots. I think it was it was in bad taste, but also it just doesn't work, right? Because I think Fetterman, everyone could see, even with the debate, there was a person who suffered this stroke and then came back out and, didn't back away, was up for the challenge and showed up.
Yep, 100%. So there's a great, say, top of our ticket here too as well. And I think that, I've got Brian kind of chime in and basically say, hey, how you feel about Fetterman, y'all? Your new senator, right? Basically, Brian out in Ohio. Yep. It's okay. You got to do the same out there in Ohio now, Brian. You got to make sure you get those folks over. But yeah, so amazing. Now, let's get down into where we are, in particular with the State House. We broke down the numbers and stuff. I have to say that I'm in Bucks County, right? I'm in the 143rd, and I am literally heartbroken that Gwen Stoltz lost her race in here. And in part because you might remember him, James Straczynski was her campaign manager, who worked with Pennsylvania State System students, right?
Yep.
And they ran the most impressive campaign I have ever seen here. I mean, they were knocking on doors over the summer. They had showed up at my house 3 times, like before we hit election season proper, and worked their absolute butts off. And I'm completely convinced, like, okay, yeah, she didn't win this, but I also look at my borough, she won our borough, right? Yeah. In ways that would not happen elsewhere. And those margins matter, right, when it comes to even at the statewide election. So we saw a similar pattern, kind of in 2020, when you had basically, people showing up and really mobilized candidates who ultimately lost, right, but nonetheless brought voters out to the table, and how important that was. And then to see it in Bucks County, to see 6 out of the 10 races like basically go to Democrats was incredible. So can you give us a sense of like that lay of the land and the kind of the state houses, and then we could drill into the outstanding races that we're seeing now?
Yep. Yeah. So currently, and we'll talk about the outstanding races, but with redistricting, I think there were opportunities, but I think you bring up a good point. I mean, across the board, there were candidates across the state who either party may have lost on Tuesday, who were out there knocking on doors and kind of building that movement, right? So there's a lot of candidates, if you talk to them after their race, that may have lost. When I was going through the election results on Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, you saw House races where 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 1,000 votes. That's close, right? And what that does is I think it sets those districts up for 2 years from now, right? So if you're if you're part of the Republican campaign committee or the Democratic campaign committee, you're going to look at those results and say, okay, 2024 is a presidential. What kind of money is going to come into this race? What kind of candidates? So I think that's credit, to the folks that find candidates. There's a lot of groups out there that do recruitment and do a great job that find folks to run in every seat, because I don't think you can take, any seat for granted across Pennsylvania. So I think we saw cases, like you said, where there were some tight races that went one way or the other. And then with the new districts in play, that opened up the map for Pennsylvania, or for the House Democrats. So what you saw were gains in Allegheny County, and then the Southeast. Actually, in Dauphin County, out my way, there were 2 Democratic pickups, and then the Lehigh Valley also got a new seat, and Berks County got a new seat. So you had that, and then on the Republican map, they were able to chip away a Western PA Dem, and they were able to flip a NEPA seat. But then you had the Dems hold that NEPA seat, which now is looking like it might be one of the more important holds when you look at what the number currently is.
Yeah, just pretty amazing. It's just pretty amazing. One of the things I also have to say is like we might be seeing some of the backlash from the real kind of right wing, more kind of extreme and approaches to what was happening in the school boards. Was one of the things I could say. Again, this is Bucks and Montco down this way. And I know this is in other places across the state too, just speaking for, folks that are in my backyard, is that once these school boards started kind of enacting these like really off the wall policies in our schools, from the book banning to the anti-trans stuff and everything like this, parents organized and stayed engaged. And it wasn't just say, okay, we lost that school board election, now we're going to go away. They've been building and getting stronger. And I have to say, from Bucks County, and I know this has been true, and I'm not asking you to go here with me, but I know this has been the true kind of in Bucks County and some other places where we've had a Democratic Party apparatus at the county level that has not been invested in building infrastructure over the long haul, right? So we have these candidates that are kind of like fly-in candidates right before the election, tons of money comes in, and then they go away. What we're seeing now, at least what I'm seeing here, kind of in Bucks County and Montgomery County, is that these parents, these community members have been staying engaged, got mobilized and woken up, right, by what's happening in the school boards. And now those are some of the same people that end up staffing these campaigns and volunteering to go door to door. So that's really, I think, positive, kind of, in more broad terms, positive in terms of like democracy, right? Mm-hmm. People engaged in their community at the local level, but also suggests kind of a pathway forward, even as we move forward to 2024, about like who's going to be doing the organizing and where that energy is coming from.
Exactly, and it's kind of, and there's different issues that relate that, right? So when I've been talking to people about even the Senate and the governor's race, like, yeah, we can talk about the candidates a lot, but what gets lost in some of that is the issues, right? So you mentioned those super local school issues. We also saw, if I take a step back and look nationally, gun issues. There's the new congressman-elect out of Florida, who I think might be the youngest person heading to Florida, who
Maxwell
that
Frost,
was their
right?
issue, right? Right.
Yep.
So you have that issue, you have climate change, and then you have abortion. I mean, those are 3 issues that I think folks are really mobilizing around and will continue, right? So I think you're right on the school board side, and then kind of broader, there's kind of these buckets of issues that are causing movements. And you're right, I don't think that hurts democracy, because I think there was a group of people, and I'm going to say it's young people, right, who have seen things happen and say, hey, it's time for a change. I mean, I was lucky enough to hit a bunch of our campuses. Kutztown was one of them, doing nonpartisan voter reg drives.
There at the table, doing the voter reg.
Yeah, and it's amazing to hear from students, no, I already voted by mail, I'm good, right? And that's, I think we saw that trend in Pennsylvania with the youth vote being so large. And I think it was students saying, hey, I want to get active, right? I want to be a part of this.
That's a really good point. I mean, I didn't process that until you just said it. But, I've been doing voter registration as kind of part of APSCUF teams on campuses for years now. And this is the first time that we go in there and like the vast majority of students who came up to the tables that we talked to, that they were already registered, had either had a plan to vote or had already sent in their ballot. And it was like, whoa, that's just a little, I mean, again, it's a very anecdotal, very local kind of thing, but nonetheless, that stuff matters.
Yep.
Yeah, great. All right. So this is kind of going to be really interesting going forward. One of the other things too, we didn't talk about this, and we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but maybe we can fold this into kind of things going forward. But I was also thinking about, there's some really damaging legislation that was kind of put into the into, say, like the bloodstream, legislative bloodstream here, in particular these kind of constitutional amendments and so on like this, which we're going to make abortion illegal, a whole bunch of other stuff, gut regulations and everything like this. And it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that stuff, if this flips Democrat, right, that stuff is gone, right? Because it has to be reintroduced again. And secondly, if it's a really close 1-seat split, right, that makes it that much more difficult to proceed with really kind of like far right ideological policy moves, right? I mean, is that your sense of going forward?
Yeah. So, and we might get into this in a minute. One of the most important things about being in the majority of either chamber is you control the calendar, right? So you get to say what bills come up or don't come up. So when you talk about those constitutional amendments that got passed in the dead of night over the summer in hearing rooms without video cameras, which we could probably do a whole podcast on how that process happened. It's I think we have one outstanding race, maybe two. I can't guarantee anything. I can't speak for any caucus, but the thought is, if the Dems were to take the House, that those constitutional amendments would not be brought up. Even if the Republicans hold the House, it's important to remember there were a few Republicans that voted against those in July. So some of the more moderates, if you hold their votes, there's a chance that these could go away, which I think, taking a step back and looking at those issues, that's a good thing, right? Those were not good constitutional amendments. I know there's some that might say, well, hey, bring it on. There were 5 states on Tuesday that said we want to expand abortion access and not limit it. It's a risk that I don't think anyone should want to take. You don't want to play with people's lives in the electorate, and you don't want to put that up, even though, there's a confidence that the voters of Pennsylvania would strongly reject that. But it's still, if it doesn't come up for a vote, that's a good thing. So I think that is in limbo. And I think maybe the folks that were pushing that, maybe they see the national trend and realize it was a bad idea. I don't know. I can't speak for them, but I think you're spot on that with the majority getting and minority parties getting as close together as they are, there's a chance that this might not come up again in 2023.
Yeah, it'd be kind of ironic if we had a Pennsylvania state legislature where you had a Republican Joe Manchin, right, who could basically play kingmaker with any legislation to move forward, right? I mean, it's a very similar kind of scenario, even if it ends up being that close with Republican control.
Yep.
Yeah. So let's I want to shift in terms of talking about, this is great. I mean, I appreciate this so much because I think so much has happened. And I think that we're going to be teasing this out for quite some time. I do want to kind of close out with our section. We'll talk a little bit about public higher education in the state, right? In particular, I mean, this is kind of, this is your bailiwick, this is your lane moving in here. And look, I mean, PASHE, the State System of Higher Education, the university that I work at, I think it's fair to say the past couple of few years have been some of the most disruptive and like upsetting the apple cart than I have ever seen or heard about. I mean, we have a consolidation of 6 universities into 2. Right. And I don't even know if do we say we're still a 14 state university system, or now you know what I'm saying? It's like, right, even at this level. And we've heard, the budget crisis stuff that's happening for years and years, and how do we move forward? There seems to be an appetite for, some folks on the Republican side have long been wanting to just like sell off campuses and kind of, privatize the whole system and all this. It seems to me that given the makeup where we're at right now, we might be seeing some changes, right? Or at the very least, the game has changed a little bit, or at least the game board has changed a little bit in terms of what public education, both K through 12, but specifically in higher ed, looks like. So from your lens, from where you're sitting, you're looking kind of going forward. And again, we don't know the where we are finally. We're still, waiting. We're not going to do Friday until all the provisional ballots are counted, what we're looking at, and then we have a special election coming up, yada, yada, yada. What do you see looking forward for public higher ed in the state?
Yep. Yeah. So I'll take a quick step back because I didn't land on this too much, but I'll
Great.
kind of give the caveat. I'll talk about the higher ed issues that we're facing. I'll say regardless of the House majority right now, depending on what you think about the open Bucks County seat, let's just say for argument's sake, it's 101 to 101. It's going to come down to the House 151st to see who's in the majority. So if we take it from that lens, it could go two ways, and the work would be a different approach. But if you get it that close, if you have a Democratic majority, there are bills that have sat in the chamber that have been sponsored by those folks who potentially could be in the majority. So the two big ones I like to bring up are the APSCUF supported and endorsed Pennsylvania Promise. It's something we ran a campaign around a few years ago. We're super excited about it. We never stopped the campaign, right? The work is always being done. What that would do is make public higher education in Pennsylvania as free and affordable as possible. We include the state related, and we include our friends at the community colleges because we want to work together to promote all of public higher education. We actually have a quick plug, papromise.org, a website up if anyone wants to find more information. It's really, I think, one of the most progressive proposals in the country.
I agree.
So that, in theory, is on the table. It took a back seat over the past 2 years to Governor Wolf's Nellie Bly proposal, which is also a great idea, giving a little over $200 million. That's just direct to PASHE students in scholarships, could wipe out tuition for thousands of students in our state system. So those type of ideas and campaigns are things that we're excited about and we want to talk more about. I will say, even if the Dems don't take the House majority, we're still, if it's 102, 101, we're still going to push and try to get some moderate folks to join us. I will say the Nellie Bly Scholarship Program also this year had a Republican co-sponsor. So it was bipartisan support. In the past, the PA Promise has also had bipartisan support. So we think, there's an opportunity and a need as quickly as possible, right, to start moving those things, because each year we don't do something like that. I think our students are feeling that burden,
Yep.
And we're seeing it in the student debt data. What would also be interesting if we were able to move one of those out of a committee and through a chamber, and I'm not saying, I'm not guaranteeing they would pass in 2023 or they would pass exactly how we wanted them. But if they got to the Senate, then there's kind of that pressure point of, hey, we have some momentum here. Let's see where we can agree. Let's get everyone together, both parties, and see, let's really support public higher education through scholarships, through affordability, whatever we can do. And then we're kind of more in the game than we have been, right? So I think the opportunities are there for those two issues. Now, the other thing that's going to be important to keep in mind is with the new administration coming in, the Shapiro administration, we really want to get a feel for what their vision is for PASHE, right? So we kind of have a fresh look at it. I think they're going to outline their agenda and what they see the state system doing. The other super important piece of a new administration is they get to appoint Board of Governors members. So the PASHE Board of Governors, for those who don't know, is a pretty powerful board. They're actually the ones that voted on the consolidation. It wasn't the legislature had the enabling act, but that came down to a Board of Governors vote. So they're the folks that are making the decisions for the system as a whole. I can't imagine what those appointees would have looked like if it was a Governor Mastriano.
Oh my God.
So we're happy to see,
I'm just gonna hang up my hat right now and walk away because I'm like, whatever.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So so those are kind of, we have the funding, we have the scholarships, we have the free college conversation, we have the new administration who's going to be, appointing hopefully pro PASHE folks to a Board of Governors. We're gonna, and we have been talking about at APSCUF, student debt issues. So we have a piece of legislation now by a House Democrat that would create a student borrower bill of rights that we're really excited about. Any opportunity to get that moved would be great. And then we're also currently working on, and Kevin, I don't know if this would help you, but some student debt relief for faculty. We went out to our membership and talked to them, and their student debt burden is still pretty high. So figuring out how we recruit new faculty members, but also give them the benefit of, hey, the state is going to set up a program to help you. And then the last piece, because I think I'm probably going too long, but this is a super important one that's flying under the radar a bit. The state system actually filed a waiver with the PA State Board of Education to start a quote unquote pilot program to give bachelor's degrees for less than 120 credit hours. obviously very concerning for us, right? There's on the surface, you might be able to say, well, that's great. If you can finish in 3 years, awesome. We have very, very real concerns about diminishing the value of a public higher education degree. No other schools in our Commonwealth are doing that. It's hard to find schools nationally that are moving to a model saying, hey, just get 90 credits. We'll cut out some of the liberal arts. We'll give you a degree and you're on your way. It would wreak havoc within higher ed. So that's something where these new legislators and this new administration, we really want to get a feel for where they're at on that issue. I will say the state system pulled their waiver last week, so it did not get considered at the board. It got pulled. But things like that, we need to stay on top of because as folks, I'll use quotes, as folks try to innovate, we need to be careful that it's not at the detriment of our students and the education that they get. Because, we hear far too often in this state, our faculty get beat up and our universities get beat up as quote unquote failing. I challenge anyone to show up to our campuses because those students on our campus are still working their butts off and tell them that degree is failing them, right? Like I'm a product of this system. I will always stand up and fight for the good things that our system does, even in the worst circumstances. And we faced the worst, I think, the past few years.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the worst thing that I have to say, and I hear this from students every single day practically these times, is anything is jeopardizing their education. It's this constant drumbeat of austerity and kind of quote unquote innovation. So I'll tell you, at Kutztown, the biggest, I went through and made a list of, there were, I think I was up to 13 or 14 students who were trying to get into this one class, but they just couldn't possibly because the cuts have been so deep. They're not replacing faculty members. And so students can't get the classes that they need to graduate. That's a disservice to the students, right? Yeah. And so, just to editorialize on that one, because, that is so important. But to go back to what you were talking about, these pieces of legislation and how important it is to have, if it was Democratic control of the State House, or even what we're going to end up with, even if the worst case scenario at this point is a very, narrow margin of majority or Republican control. And there are some of these Republicans who have worked with, public higher education in the past. So they may be kind of a moderating force in some things. The most important thing to me is that these pieces of legislation no longer are ideas, right? They're proposals that are actually going to get talked about. That drives media coverage. And so we can actually have real conversations about it. Because I think for the average person in Pennsylvania, if they hear something like the PA promise, like, okay, yeah, that's a great idea. But when it becomes a material possibility, right, where people are talking about it, where they can actually go to their legislators and say, wait, I hear there's this bill that's on the floor and I want to talk to you about it, the whole dynamic changes. And even if it was not, like you said, even if it's not something that could be passed, say, in this next session, if you're building there, right, toward a much more stable long-term environment. So that's the point number one. The point number two is what you talk about with innovation. I think there's these two that I would love to see further discussion around. One, putting pressure upon what we mean by innovation, right? Because, the Silicon Valley model of innovation is like, like break shit and see where it ends up. And then we go from there, right? It's like you try all this stuff and you just break things. And then with the pieces, like you put it back together. It's like, the SpaceX version of higher education where you just crash enough rockets and explode them. Like, except here we're talking about people's lives, right? Mm-hmm. People's lives and education and futures. So that's the one. So what do we mean by innovation? Innovation for what end? And then the second one is that, the whole idea about growth, that we can just grow ourselves out of everything. There was an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education just came out a couple days ago saying, Pennsylvania has too many campuses, right? And the thrust of that, I swear to God, if I didn't know better, I think this article was planted by somebody who wants to see the further consolidation. That was like, as soon as I read it, right? That's what it sounded like to me. But the point is like, there's other ways of imagining higher education. Right? Is it too many campuses? Or, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't kind of be thinking about higher education just having massive amounts of students crammed into lecture halls, right? We have a bunch of other models, which is what the state system had been, right? Until relatively recently, where you're talking about kind of smaller classrooms, direct access to faculty, which shows you better retention, especially with first-generation college kids, and a whole bunch of other things. So we can have a different kind of conversation other than just growth and innovation. End of diatribe.
No, you're exactly right. I think to that point, sometimes people, and that's part of my job, working with folks in Harrisburg to say, pick one of our universities. that university wasn't built for 20,000 students, and that's okay,
Exactly.
right? That's
Right.
and so I think sometimes folks get so hung up in enrollment that they ignore this university was made for 2,000 or 3,000 students, and those students are getting a world-class education by great folks, and we should celebrate that, not say, why are the numbers so low, right? And I saw the article in the Chronicle as well, and I thought the same thing. Why shouldn't there be space in Pennsylvania for everyone, right? Like I grew up around a bunch of world-class universities. Now I get to work with the faculty at a bunch of other great universities. Like there's something for everyone who wants it, and again, that's not a bad thing. So I call it kind of the Hunger Games, and I think that article bled into it, the Hunger Games of higher ed, where everyone thinks it's a competition, and it shouldn't be. And I will say one of the great things I love about APSCUF is we work really well with a bunch of other universities because we're all in it for the same reason, right? It's not, we kind of say, the funding through Harrisburg shouldn't be pie. It shouldn't be how much can I get and forget everybody else. It should be, what are we doing to help our Commonwealth and help our students and our families? And I think everybody plays a role in that. So yeah, when I saw articles like that, it does get frustrating around that framing.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Sean, man, I appreciate you so much taking the time out tonight, and kind of like, getting the kid to bed before and all this stuff. I'm so glad we're able to do this. But is there anything that you'd kind of want to leave folks with before obviously people should go out, check out abscuf.org. Make sure you follow you on Twitter at Sean Crampsie and kind of all the amazing work you do. But is there anything that you think people should be paying attention to or that you want to leave them with or from this way going forward?
Yeah, I guess if I could end with one plug, and we touched on it a little bit, but whether it's the PA Promise or the Nellie Bly program, I think next year we'll see something dealing with free, affordable, and scholarships. If you're engaged with this podcast or you love what Kevin does, because we all do, if you could get engaged around that, because you mentioned building the campaign, and we have been doing that through different methods, but I think you're right. Once it becomes more real to people and we can, get one-on-one, now that we're kind of getting back out into communities and back out on campus, we can explain the benefits. And once we explain the benefits of making college more affordable for our students, it's hard to argue against. Our students, if they can graduate with little to no student debt, they're getting jobs in the Commonwealth, they're starting families, they're shopping downtown, right? It's all kind of this cycle of it benefits everyone to have less student debt. And I know the feds are doing their thing, but I think we can also do a lot more in our state on the front end to make it more affordable, and then on the back end to make sure our graduates aren't crushed by student debt.
Well,
so stay engaged.
Yeah, stay engaged. And I'll tell you, you just basically gave the promo for the next time that I'm going to bug you to get on the show as soon as we get some of these things coming out so we can start pushing out this campaign and, maybe even bring some students on too as well who've been working on this issue. I'd love to have, because I know like students are engaged everywhere. They know firsthand kind of the, the anchor of student debt that they're going to have to carry and what it would mean for their lives going forward if we could pass this stuff. Well, Sean, I appreciate all the work you do, man, and appreciate you coming out tonight. And man, we'll see where this crazy election winds up. But man, it seems like a new day in PA.
Yep. Thanks so much.
All right, you got it. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Thank you all for the new watchers and the new viewers for tonight. I really appreciate it. I want to remind you that you can support this podcast by heading over to patreon.com/RCPress today. You become a patron for as little as $5 a month. We'll be with you again for the Friday Politics Roundup, and then we're going to take a little time off for Thanksgiving. So get re-energized, ready for the fight.
Let me try my people call.